The Germans were not the worst thing in those woods. Some nights even they fired blindly into the trees, terrified of the same thing we were. I still remember that bitter winter of 1942, when our unit was stationed deep in the forests outside Smolensk. The snow was never white. It was red and grey, churned by boots, shells, and the remains of men who no longer had names. We believed the front was hell until we learned what waited beyond the firelight. That made bullets and bombs feel like mercy. We dug shallow trenches into frozen ground, hacking at the permafrost with picks that barely broke its surface. The air was always thick with smoke and the stench of burning diesel. You'd think the constant gunfire and shelling would be what haunted me, but no. What stayed with me was the silence between the bursts, the silence where all you could hear was the wind slipping through skeletal trees, whistling like 1,000 distant voices. That winter, both sides learned to fear the dark. One night I was on watch with Sergei, a wiry young man from Leningrad who had already lost half his family to the siege. There was a hollow look in his eyes, the kind men get when the war is the only thing they have left. The moon hung low, half hidden by clouds, shadows stretching long across the snow. It was too quiet. No artillery, no shouting, not even footsteps. Then it came, a scream. Not human, not animal, something twisted and stretched, as if torn from a frozen throat. It echoed through the trees, bouncing so wildly we couldn't tell if it was near or far. Sergei stiffened beside me, hands trembling around his rifle. "That's not ours," he whispered. Moments later, German machine guns opened up on the opposite side of the forest short, desperate bursts, cutting down trees and lighting the darkness with muzzle flashes. Men shouted in panic, their voices cracking. It wasn't an attack, it was fear. That was the night I understood. Whatever hunted those woods belonged to neither side. It belonged to the land. The next morning we were sent to recover supply. Crates dropped too close to the German line. Our patrol was small, me, Sergei, and two others, Kostya and Mikhail. Snow rose to our knees, breath fogging the cold air. Halfway there, Kostya stopped and pointed at the ground. Footprints, bare human footprints, long and thin, pressed deep into the frozen snow. No boots, no shoes, and impossibly heavy the prints sank as if the walker weighed far more than a man should. They were fresh. We followed the tracks in silence, rifles raised. They curved around trees, doubled back, circled us playfully, as if whatever made them wanted us to follow. Then they simply stopped, mid-stride, as if the figure had vanished into thin air. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind carried whispers, voices I almost recognized. My mother's, a friend who died outside Minsk, and Sergei sat awake too, staring into the dark, lips moving as if answering someone only he could hear. At dawn we found another unit men from our side frozen stiff just beyond the tree line. They hadn't been shot. Their rifles were still slung over their shoulders. Their eyes were open. Their mouths were packed with snow, as if they had screamed while being buried alive. But there had been no storm. The officers told us to stay quiet, but fear already had us by the throat. The war was cruel, yes, but cruelty had a face you could shoot at. This was different. When night fell, every man prayed the lamps would stay lit. 2 weeks later, a blizzard from the west swallowed the forest. Visibility dropped to nothing. The Germans went silent. No artillery, no mortars. For once we were grateful. We huddled in the trench, shaking, trying to keep our weapons dry. Then through the storm came that scream again. Clouser this time, sharp enough to silence the entire trench. I swear I felt the ground tremble beneath me as it faded. Mikhail snapped first. He climbed out of the trench, cursing. "If it's a German trick," he snarled, "I'll silence them myself." He vanished into the storm. Minutes later, 3 sharp rifle cracks, then silence. At last a shape appeared, stumbling back toward us. Mikhail, but wrong. His gait uneven, head lolling, his rifle dragging behind him. Sergei reached up to pull him in. I stopped him. Even through the snow, I could see Mikhail's eyes. Glassy, unfocused, dead. He dropped into the trench. His skin was ice. He did not shiver, he did not breathe. When Sergei touched him, Mikhail lunged, hands locking around his throat with inhuman strength. It took 3 of us to tear him away. I raised my rifle and fired. He collapsed. But when we checked him, we realized the truth. Mikhail had been dead for hours. The woods closed tighter around us after that. Men carved crosses into their rifles. Some swore they saw faces in the tree line. Some heard laughter, thin, cruel, drifting through the branches. A week later, we captured a German wandering near our lines, frostbitten and delirious. In broken Russian, he whispered, "Die Wada sind verflucht." The woods are cursed. He claimed his unit had been dragged into the darkness, that they saw dead men walking, that his commanding officer shot himself after hearing his mother's voice calling from the trees. Our officers dismissed him as insane. We knew better. The nightmares grew worse. Men swore they sleepwalked toward the forest. Others claimed they heard their own names whispered in familiar voices. By mid-January, the war felt like background noise. The forest had become the true enemy, an enemy you couldn't kill, and then the Germans and Soviets fought side by side. It began with a howling not wolves, something deeper, like a choir chanting in a language older than the snow. Then gunfire erupted from the German lines, dozens of rifles at once, panic-stricken. A flare lit the field red, and we saw them, pale figures, dozens of them, lurching through the German trenches, broken limbs, bare feet, eyes glowing faintly red. They moved with silent purpose, dead faces lit by the flare. When one sprinted toward us, I fired, twice. It fell. When we dragged the body closer, I wished we hadn't a Soviet soldier. 3 bullet wounds in his chest, frozen stiff. Unmistakably dead, and yet I had seen him run. Mikhail had not been the first, only the beginning. For an hour, Germans and Soviets fired together into the tree line. But bullets did little. For every one that fell, 2 more emerged. By dawn, silence returned. The field was littered with the bodies of Germans, Soviets, and others. The officers called it tricks, illusions, chemicals. But illusions don't leave frostbitten handprints around your throat. Days later, Sergei and I went on recon. We found a scorched tree split down the middle. At its base, bare footprints spiraling outward, circling a man-shaped hollow in the earth, as if something had risen from beneath. Kostya broke down then, screaming for his mother. He sprinted into the trees. We found him hours later, frozen to a tree trunk, arms fused to the bark, his mouth open in a silent scream. His eyes glowed faintly in the shade. Sergei vomited. I could only stare. The final blizzard lasted 6 nights. By then, the dead came every night, knocking in threes, whispering our names. Appearing at the trench edge, familiar faces twisted by frost. By the 4th night, they no longer waited. Kostya crawled into our trench, his frozen jaw working as if trying to speak. Sergei panicked and shot him. This time, the body stayed dead, but the boundary between us and them was gone. Soon dozens came. German, Soviet men from both sides. Not attacking, just standing above us, swaying, watching. Their silence broke us. On the 6th night, the fires died. The storm quieted. The whispers grew loud. One man ran into the dark, crying for his wife. His scream cut off abruptly. His place in the line filled by a pale figure moments later. The dead began climbing into the trench. Cold hands pulled men down, rifles jammed, screams rose and were smothered. Sergei swung a shovel wildly, terror in his eyes. They fell on us like a tide of ice. The last thing I remember was being dragged into the snow by frozen hands, while a voice, my mother's voice, called softly to me. Then darkness. I woke buried beneath snow. For a moment I believed I had risen with the others, but I coughed, air searing my lungs. I clawed my way out. The trench was collapsed. Rifles jutted from the snow like grave markers. My comrades were gone. Then I saw them, standing in a silent circle at the clearing's edge. Dozens, maybe hundreds, swaying gently. Among them was Sergei, his throat bruised purple. his eyes vacant, his lips moving in silent words, calling me closer. My legs nearly obeyed, but I stopped myself. The dead did not advance. They only watched, whispering without sound. The woods had taken them, and they wanted me to.